George Mason University President Gregory Washington leads Virginia's largest and most diverse public university with the enrollment growing to nearly 40,000 students. Dr. Washington launched his Mason presidency in July 2020 with a series of initiatives to create new academics and entrepreneur pathway for all Virginia. He also opened or broke ground on the academic facility at all 3 Virginia campuses and established a task force to ensure fairness in university practice and policy. Dr. Washington strengthened Mason's commitment to access by creating the Mason Virginia Promise, a pathway to the Mason degree to help starting a business for any Virginian who aspire to either goals. Mason Virginia Promise expand Mason National Award-winning Advanced Program partnership with the Northern Virginia Community College to select community colleges throughout the state. On Mason campus in Arlington, known as the Mason Square, Dr. Washington marshaled the largest public-private partnership in Mason history, fused at Mason Square. On the Fairfax campus, Mason in November 2022 established the first college of public health in Virginia. And on the Science and Technology campus in Manassas, the university developed partnership to seamlessly break ground on the new Life Science and Engineering building and on the Innovation Town Center and the University Village at Innovation Project. Dr. Washington is a former engineering dean at Ohio State University and the University of California, Irvine. In February 2023, he was elected to the National Academy of Engineering, the highest engineering honor in the country. Please welcome the President of George Mason University, Dr. Gregory Washington.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. It looks like we're bringing up the end here. Well, first and foremost, to all of the students, and I mean all the students in the room, congratulations. This is indeed well-deserved. And we are here really to celebrate you all and to celebrate what you all are going to do. This is our down payment on the great things that we know that you are going to achieve once you leave here. So can we give the students a round of applause? But we're also here to celebrate something that is, in my opinion, even greater than that. And that is the belief in the power of education to transform lives, right? That's what Long Nguyen and Kimmy Duong have been doing. Supporting these students and positioning them for success in their future will transform their lives, and that transformation would lead to a transformation of the country. And there's no greater example of that than Kimmy Duong and her success as a Vietnamese American who relied on her education to become a success in this country. What her education did for her, and part of that enduring impact, is the example that she's setting for all of us here today. Imagine if every single leader who became a success in the corporate world did that. Imagine if they all did this. Would we have many of the challenges we have today in our country? I project to you that we would not. And on that note, can we give our host a round of applause? Thank you. Oftentimes what's being done here is what we actually do at Mason. It's about transforming lives and moving individuals into successful positions that impact our community and our world. And I am just ecstatic to see this very large group of students here receive awards today. Congratulations to you all. Go Patriots.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. The first recipient for George Mason University is our Gold Scholar, Ms. Jocelyn Andrade, a senior majoring in psychology and criminology. She used a quote from Vincent van Gogh. If you hear a voice within you saying, "You are not a painter," then by all means paint, boy, and that voice will be silenced, but only by working. Her scholarship is sponsored by CRESET and presented by Mr. Lars Åkesson. The next recipient is our Gold Scholar, Mr. Caden Johnson, a freshman with undeclared major. He used a quote by Marshall P. Johnson. History isn't something you look back at and say it was inevitable. It happens because the people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment, but those moments are cumulative realities. The scholarship is sponsored by Dr. Kang Nguyen in memory of Duong Kim Le and presented by Dr. Kang Nguyen. Next recipient is Gold Scholar Mr. Huang Le, a junior majoring in electrical engineering. He used a quote by Joseph Fourier. The profound study of nature is the most fertile source of mathematical discoveries. The scholarship is sponsored by Dr. Kang Nguyen in memory of Duong Kim Le and presented by Dr. Kang Nguyen. The next recipient is Diamond Scholar, Ms. Valerie Vu. She's a junior majoring in chemistry. She says, "I only want to ride the wind and walk the waves, slay the big whales of the eastern sea, clean up frontiers, and save the people from drowning. Why should I imitate others, bow my head, stoop over and be a slave? Why resign myself to menial housework?" The scholarship is sponsored by Mr. Chris and Mrs. Linda Klaas and presented by Mr. Chris and Mr. Linda Klaas. The next recipient is our Silver Scholar, Ms. Ivy Dang, a freshman majoring in finance and business. She says, "If you don't challenge yourself, you don't know yourself." The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Mrs. Barbara Vogt. The next recipient is our Gold Scholar, Ms. Kim Ngo, a junior in mathematics. She says, "My dream isn't to become the best. It is to be someone who I'm not ashamed to be." The scholarship is sponsored by Capital One and presented by Mr. Mike Monroe. The next is a Gold Scholar, Ms. Alisa Nguyen, a sophomore in nursing. She used a quote by Steve Jobs. "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." The scholarship is sponsored by Capital One, presented by Mr. Mike Monroe. Next is our Silver Scholar, Mr. James Barr, a junior in film and video studies. He says, "I'd rather try and fail than have never tried at all." The scholarship is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Uy Nguyen, Teletron, presented by Mrs. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Ms. Betsy Baladares, a senior in social work. She says, she used a quote by Taraji P. Henson. "I don't harp on the negative because if you do, then there's no progression. There's no forward movement. You got to always look on the bright side of things. The scholarship is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Teletron and presented by Mrs. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar Alexandra Merida, a senior in community health. She says that the only impossible journey is the one you never begin. The scholarship is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Teletron, presented by Mrs. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar Alicia George, a senior in social work and minor in criminology. She used a quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. The scholarship is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen Teletron, presented by Mrs. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Connie Lam, a sophomore in engineering. She says, when I think of Vietnamese traditions, I do not think about the cuisine, the language, or the traditions. I think about the determination from others for the best of themselves, family, and community. The scholarship is sponsored by Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is a Gold Scholar, Louis Casahun, a sophomore in computer sciences. He used a quote by Jim Rohn. If you really want to do something, you find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. The scholarship is sponsored by Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Young Taek Kim, a junior in computer sciences. He says, a ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. The scholarship is sponsored by Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is Tao Le, a freshman in finance. She used a quote by Willie Nelson. Once you replace negative thoughts with positive ones, you'll start having positive results. The scholarship is sponsored by Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Mr. Brian Nguyen, a sophomore in computer sciences. He says, we cannot solve today's problems with mentality that created them. The scholarship is sponsored by the Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is a Gold Scholar, Lillian Nguyen, a junior in computer sciences. She used a quote by Margaret Atwood. A voice is a human gift. It should be cherished and used to utter fully human speech as much as possible. Powerlessness and silence go together. The scholarship is sponsored by Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next, our Gold Scholar, Nha Uy Nguyen, a senior in bioengineering. She used a quote by Thomas Edison. Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time. Scholarship is sponsored by Long and Kimmy Nguyen Family Foundation and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Tai Hua Nguyen, a freshman in computer sciences. She used a quote by Oprah Winfrey. Passion is energy. Feel the power that comes from focusing on what excites you. The scholarship is sponsored by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Vincent Nguyen, a senior in communications. He says, there's a reason that God gave us 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. It's so that you can listen and watch twice as much as you talk. Best of all, listening costs you nothing. Scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is Phương Anh Quách, a Gold Scholar, a freshman with undeclared major. She used a Vietnamese proverb, bầu ơi thơm lấy bí cùng, tuy rằng khác giống nhưng chung một dàng. Briefly translated as people may be different but love them all, as we are part of the sum. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is a Gold Scholar, Ensley Toes, a sophomore in biology. She says, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is a Gold Scholar, Adriana Chen, a freshman in business. She says, I would rather die than live without passion. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Kimmy Chen, a sophomore in computer sciences. He used the quote by Colin Powell. There are no secrets to success. It is a result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Silver Scholar, Nhi E Chen, a junior in geography. She used a quote by Albert Einstein. Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Ms. Kim Chuang, a senior in Business Management and Information Systems. She used a quote by Mark Lee. The possibility of all those possibilities being possible is just another possibility that can possibly happen. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is our Gold Scholar, Minh Quân Vo, a sophomore in Business Information Technology and Cybersecurity. He says, whoever is happy will make others happy too. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Next is a Gold Scholar, Anthony Vu, a sophomore in mathematics. He says, education then, beyond all other devices of human origin, is the great equalizer of the conditions of man. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. Our next recipient is a Gold Scholar, Ling Vu, a sophomore in nursing. She used a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. The scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. And finally, we have the last recipient for this morning. Our Diamond Scholar, Mr. Justin Zombron, a junior in business, and he used a quote by Frederick Douglass. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. And the scholarship is sponsored and presented by Dr. Long Nguyen and Ms. Kimmy Duong. And now is the conclusion of the scholarship presentation for this morning.